Chapter 13 of the Outdoor Chums in the Big Woods. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Outdoor Chums in the Big Woods by Captain Quincy Allen. Chapter 13. Another Hunt for Venison. "A good riddance to bad rubbish," remarked Bluff with a grin, as they saw the party disappear in the woods, with Bill Nackerson still snarling at his friends. "I hope none of us will ever see that man again," said Mr. Darrell, as he shook hands with each of his young friends. "And Bluff," Frank observed, turning on the other, "I want to say that you did that business in fine shape. He seemed to have one eye on me, and I was afraid that if I started off to the cabin he would break loose." "That was a happy thought, your sending me," replied Bluff, "and I'll always feel that you did me a big favor. We're sure glad to see you, Mr. Darrell. Hope you mean to spend some little time with us." "Only one night, boys," replied the lumberman. "I have so much going on at Lumber Run Camp, with new men arriving daily, that it's necessary for me to be on the job constantly. How are you all, anyway?" "Feeling fine and dandy, sir," Jerry told him. "And getting some rattling good pictures in the bargain," added Will. "I'll show you what we've done later on, sir." "How about you, Bluff?" demanded the lumberman, noticing that the other had not made any reply to his question. "I hope you've kept your appetite, and can come up smiling 3 times a day when the meal hour arrives." "Oh, I'm all right, Mr. Darrell," replied Bluff. "Nothing the matter with my eating apparatus." During the rest of that day they had much to show their guest, and to tell him as well. It seems as though the lumberman was having the time of his life in the society of these bright young fellows. At least he told them he was renewing his own youth. They got up at supper later on that could be called sumptuous. Bluff and Frank exerted themselves to make a spread that would convince their guest they were well acquainted with camp cookery. "I haven't enjoyed a meal as much as that for years," Mr. Darrell told them afterward, as they sat around the fire. Bluff immediately commenced patting himself as though he felt happy over having his work praised in this fashion. Will expected to start out presently with one of the others for company, in order to place his camera trap again. He believed he could get a fox to take the tempting bait and thus photograph his own features. Their tongues clattered for several hours that evening. Mr. Darrell insisted on hearing scores of things connected with their past experiences. They had lots to tell, and everyone took a hand in relating the story. It was almost like living those happy days over again, as they pictured the numerous thrilling episodes, one after another. Nothing would do but Bluff should arrange a couch on the floor, while their guest occupied his bunk. Mr. Darrell would have insisted on declining, only he saw how set the boy was upon carrying out his plan, and what a deal of pleasure it seemed to afford him. Indeed, Will and Jerry envied him that new bed, when they saw what a cozy nest Frank and Bluff had made of it. A lot of hemlock browse, of which there was no lack in the vicinity of the woods cabin, had been piled up and covered with part of the blanket, the other fold being intended for a covering. As the fire was to be kept up through the night, since it was getting very cold outdoors, Bluff was not likely to suffer. Mr. Darrell had been thoughtful enough to fetch his own blanket on his back. He knew each of the boys had one apiece, and realized that unless he provided for himself, he must deprive one of them. The owner of the Lumber Run Camp stayed until the following noon, when finally he started back. 2 of the boys went part of the way with him. "I hope to see you all again before many days, boys," had been his parting words. "And if I don't get over here, remember, you must drop in at our camp on your way out. I want to keep in touch with such a fine lot of young chaps. And Will, tell Uncle Felix for me that I'm 1,000 times obliged to him for sending you up here. I feel 10 years younger." Will was feeling very chipper that day. He had found his trap sprung, and upon developing the exposed film, found that he had obtained a remarkably fine picture of a fox. All the others told him he was making great headway toward winning that prize offered by the Maine Railroad. The success that had rewarded his perseverance thus far did much to inspire Will with further ambition. "If I could only get a view of a bull moose before we leave here, I think I'd be the happiest fellow in 7 counties," he said that evening, when again the 4 chums gathered before their crackling fire. Did you ever seen a finer spell of brisk, bracing weather than we've been having? Jerry wanted to know. And, Frank, tomorrow we must be sure to get started on that hunt we've put off for so long. The last bit of venison was cooked for supper tonight, you know, and what's a camp in the woods without game hanging up?" "That suits me all right," Frank replied, "unless Will here or Bluff would rather keep you company." "Please don't count on my doing any hunting with a murderous gun on this trip," Will hastened to say. "I'm too much taken up with this new hobby of mine. Not that I would refuse to help eat any nice partridge, venison, or even bear meat, if you insist on bringing it into camp." At that the rest laughed. "I've heard others talk that way before," Frank remarked. "One old fellow who was said to be a natural woodsman, and who used to write splendid things for the sporting magazines, always boasted about going into the woods light, carrying little besides a blanket, a coffee pot, frying pan, cup, tin plate, and a few necessities in the way of coffee, tea, sugar, and the like." "Yes, I've heard of him, too," broke in Bluff. "And while he used to make all manner of fun of the poor sillies who nearly broke their backs toting all sorts of good things like canned meats into camp, he confessed that he was always willing to help them get rid of the grub later on." In this lively fashion did they pass the evening, and then came the time for turning in. Another peaceful night followed. The boys were gradually forgetting Bill Nackerson and his threats. If they thought of him at all, it was with the hope that he had come to his senses and concluded it would hardly pay to bother the inmates of the cabin, since they had such a staunch friend in the big lumberman. On the following morning Jerry and Frank started off. The former was counting on making a respectable addition to the larder before they returned. Frank expected to take a new course, covering ground that none of them had as yet hunted over. At the same time he explained to Jerry as they moved along, "I'm trying to keep a good distance away from the place where that other crowd is. We don't hanker about having any trouble with Nackerson, and the best way to avoid it is to give him a wide berth." Presently it was thought advisable to keep still. In that frosty atmosphere even ordinary sounds could be heard at some distance, and deer have the sharpest of ears. Of course the hunters had headed up into what light wind was stirring, so that their coming might not be heralded by the scent upon which a wild animal depends to give him warning of the approach of danger. A number of times they were flurried by flushing a covey of partridges. Jerry almost wished they had come prepared to load down with the birds, but until the last flickering chance of getting a deer had died out, Frank advised that they confine their attention to the one thing they had in mind. On the way home, he told Jerry, when the other sighed at seeing 3 plump birds sitting on a limb within easy range, "We can get all we want if the venison is missing." So Jerry had to be content. They had gone several miles from camp, and so far had not started a deer. Tracks in the snow had been seen several times. Indeed, Frank was really following a trail that he seemed to think rather fresh. It could do no harm, and might turn out a wise move on their part, Jerry realized, as he trotted along at the side of his chum. "Did you hear anything like a shout, then?" Frank suddenly asked. Before Jerry could reply, it came again. This time the sound was seemingly close by, certainly not over a quarter of a mile away. "Somebody's in trouble, Frank," exclaimed Jerry, immediately aroused. "That was a cry for help." "It certainly was," agreed Frank. "We'll push on in that direction, but let's keep our eyes about us, and look sharp against anything like treachery." "You're thinking of Nackerson." "Just who I am. He wouldn't hesitate a minute if he could lure us into a trap. But that sounds genuine enough, I must say." They hurried their footsteps. Indeed, the piteous nature of the cries thrilled the boys. "He can't be very far away now," ventured Jerry, panting a little from his exertions. "Just back of that scrub yonder," replied Frank. "Let's move out a little, and in that way we can see him before we get too close." 3 minutes later Jerry broke out again. "I can see him now, Frank. He's sitting down and holding on to his foot. There he gets up again, and oh, my stars, Frank, what's he got fastened to his leg? I declare to goodness if it doesn't look like one of Jesse Wilcox's bear traps." "Just what it is, Jerry, though it's hard to believe," added Frank, also excited. "Don't you see who the poor chap is?" "Why, as sure as anything, it's that Teddy we saw with Bill Nackerson on the train coming here. The poor fellow, to get himself in such a pickle as that!" End of chapter 13.